It's Monday, it's 12:15 and we're live in Westminster. Joining me, Conservative MP Laura Farris, Labour MP Angela Eagle, Guardian Chief Political Correspondent Jessica Elgott and Sunday Times columnist Robert Colville. Today is now the time for tax cuts.
I want to cut all taxes.
I think you must start with the tax cuts to kick-start the growth.
I would bring the tax cut, which is slated for next year, forward. Leadership
candidates, including Liz Truss, think so. But the former Chancellor thinks they're fairy tales. While the focus is on the next Conservative leader, can Labour's leader stay relevant?
We need a fresh start, but we're not going to get that from a Conservative Party infected with the chaos virus caught from Boris Johnson.
And speaking of Boris Johnson, he's still there.
I'm doing the last few days, weeks, or however long it is. But the job of government has got to be carried on in that period.
We're going to be talking a lot about the unfolding leadership contest. There's a dizzying, I should say, array of candidates. It's wide open, the contest at the moment. But just to start, with the two journalists, first of all, what has surprised you, if anything, about what you've seen of the contest so far over the weekend? Jess?
I think we've seen some of the most... I mean, we've seen extraordinary numbers of candidates coming out, including another one today, Raymond Chistey. But I think some of the endorsements have been some of the most surprising. Esther McVey running as Deputy Prime Minister to Jeremy Hunt, seeing Michael Gove endorse Kemi Badenoch, and seeing Jake Berry, a very influential Northern MP, endorse Tom Tugendhat. I think that shows you how unpredictable the race is.
Robert?
Yes, I mean, I think Ben Wallace not standing was obviously a big surprise. I think he'd been widely expected to be one of the front runners. I think Suella Braverman emerging as the sort of standard bearer of the pure Brexit right versus Steve Baker rowing in behind her. I think that was a bit of a surprise. And Kemi Badenoch emerging not just as the sort of candidate of the next generation, but then attracting the endorsement of Michael Gove. I thought that was an interesting moment.
Well, there may be more surprises to come, of course. What about for you, Angela?
I'm really surprised that Peter Bone hasn't thrown his hat in the ring. After all, he now has government experience.
He will have, won't he? Laura?
Yeah, for me, I think Ben Wallace's decision was probably the most surprising, yeah.
Would you like to see him stand? Would you have liked to have seen him stand?
Well, I like Ben. I think he's done an excellent job on Ukraine. I wouldn't tell anyone whether they should stand or not. But
what about your support?
Yeah.
Where are you going to put it?
I'm supporting Rishi Sunak.
Was that a difficult decision? Did you take your time over it, or had you already thought he was the man for you?
I had been thinking for some weeks about who I would support in a leadership contest, and then this weekend I didn't really take any calls. I really reflected on what my priorities were and where I thought we needed to be, and I reached the decision on my own.
What was the overriding sort of factor for you?
I think that the greatest challenge facing the country at the moment is economic. And for that reason, I did think that the most skilled economist, was probably going to have a natural advantage with me. And it was very compelling that the last time we had a major economic crisis with COVID, of course, he was the Chancellor, but he was brand new in the job. And I remember at the time him talking about how he had to prepare a budget with just weeks to go, and then immediately he had to respond to a crisis, and he did it with imagination and dexterity. He put in place the furlough scheme rapidly, and I found all of that, I have to say, really, really impressive. And I think that my constituents really like him too.
Angela?
I think Rishi Sunak's campaigning to put the economy back together without people noticing that he's been running it for 3 years himself, and that the Conservatives have been in power since 2010, and we've had very, very low growth, even worse productivity. And we're now in a situation where there's a huge cost of living crisis that they've been very, very, very slow in responding to. The question for the leadership candidate shouldn't be what taxes are they going to cut? It's what are they going to do to make certain that when there's an over 60% increase in the price cap, for energy in October, taking it to an average of £3,200 a year. How are they going to respond to that? Because there are millions of people in our country that are going to have to choose between heating and eating.
Do you agree with that, Laura, that that should be at the forefront of Rishi Sunak's mind?
Well, if I can just take Angela's first point first. She talked about low growth. And I don't think you can divorce what's happened in growth from the fact that the last 2 years have predominantly been spent firefighting the pandemic. I think he has had really good growth strategies, things like the Future Fund, the investment that the Treasury has made into R&D, the super deduction, all of that really stimulated development in my constituency.
Super deduction didn't work, and he admits that it didn't work. We've got stagnant growth expected next year of 0. This is not a record that Rishi Sunak or the Conservative Party can be proud of.
So I think that those steps are beginning to work. They're working in my constituency. Some of the small businesses have told me that they're hiring. On the cost of living, look, I think it's well known that he's already made £400 for every household off the cost of living. The 8 million most vulnerable households get £650, but it's not going to be resolved by handouts. It's going to be resolved by dealing with the energy crisis. And I think you need a Prime Minister who has dealt with a crisis before to be put into number 10.
All right, well, let's move on and have a look at the slate there of candidates, prospective leadership candidates, Conservative leadership supporters. You can see the number of MPs who are backing each individual. We can add another one to Rishi Sunak, because I don't think you will have been included in that. It's 35. What we're all waiting to see is later on, when the 1922 Committee of Backbench MPs meets to decide exactly how the contest is going to work. What are they going to be doing, Jess?
So at first they've got to elect a new committee, and most people are re-standing for it. But because a lot of the Boris Johnson supporters have now had to take jobs in government, it's only backbenchers who'll get a vote. Therefore, we're expecting, even more than before, a slate of very heavily anti-Boris Johnson candidates to be elected to the 22. They're likely to favour a very short contest. And so what we're probably going to see is a higher threshold for the number of MPs nominations that you'll need to get on the ballot paper. That could eliminate quite a lot of the people on your chart very quickly.
Well, if it's 25 plus.
If it's 25 plus. There's talk even of maybe making the next round 10% of the party, which I think would be 36 or so. So again, that would, if you're going by what was the last round of in 2019, that would have cut an awful lot of people out very early on, even some of the people who ended up doing reasonably well, like Sajid Javid or Dominic Raab or Rory Stewart.
Right, well, tax and tax cuts certainly dominating this contest so far. Let's take a look at the front page of the Daily Telegraph. Liz Truss vows, I would cut taxes from day one, and she's not alone. But let's have a listen to Paul Johnson from the Institute of Fiscal Studies.
It's terribly easy to say that we want to cut taxes, but it's much harder to say how we want to reform public services or make public services work in a world in which they may have less money.
Paul Johnson there. What do you make of tax and tax cuts, particularly being at the forefront of this campaign?
Well, I'm very happy with this. As well as being a Sunday Times columnist, I run the Centre for Policy Studies think tank, which was founded by Margaret Thatcher and Keith Joseph to argue for a low-tax, small state free market economy. And we've been making many of these arguments, in particular over corporation tax. In fact, it was a report of ours which triggered the sort of final row between Rishi and Boris on this. I think everyone is talking as though tax cuts are some sort of weird Tory preoccupation. In fact, there are two very, very good reasons for tax cuts, particularly for the kind of tax cuts that people are talking about in this campaign. The first is that come spring next year, we have an absolute cliff edge in terms of business taxation. The super deduction ends, corporation tax goes up by 6%, and research that we've done with the Tax Foundation and a non-partisan think tank in Washington, D.C. shows that we will suddenly have one of the least competitive tax regimes in the OECD. I think we go to 30th or 31st out of 37. That's not a recipe for growth. Similarly, in terms of the sort of individual-facing tax cuts, obviously, as we've just heard, we have a cost of living crisis. We're going to have a massive rise in fuel duty. The government is going to need to do something to help people feel less poor. Is this just a Tory obsession, Jess, or will it appeal to the wider country?
I think the preoccupation of the wider country is about how they're going to pay their bills at the end of the day. And I think even an income tax cut, which, every little helps, but if you look at what a 1% income tax cut would mean people on a monthly basis, it doesn't really touch the sides of what inflationary pressures are doing to household budgets. And the cost of these things, you know, the initial layout costs, and of course the idea is to drive growth, so are huge, billions of pounds. I mean, if you're going to cut, you're going to put back the national insurance cut, then you're spending something like £17 billion to do that. If you don't have the forthcoming corporation tax cuts, it's, you know, sort of 45 billion pounds initial layout, and I think candidates are going to have to explain.
It's 12 billion. 45 billion is the expected thing over 3 years, but that was in a world where we'd recovered by now. So the actual figure is much lower.
But even still, I think that probably what they're going to have to, what candidates are going to have to explain is what it means, and some of them are explaining that. And Liz Truss is saying what you'll have to do is, you know, is not necessarily reach the fiscal rules at the time that Rishi Sunak had ambitions to do so.
Right, well, let's talk to one of Liz Truss's supporter. Wendy Morton joins us now. Hello to you. I suppose one of the overriding questions is if Liz Truss is committing to, as she says, make corporation tax competitive, reverse the recent national insurance rise and overhaul business rates, how much is it going to cost?
Look, I think the thing you're making the argument here as to why tax cuts are so important. We are facing some real challenges when it comes to the cost of living here in the country. And in Liz, she's committed to tax cuts. But we have somebody who is a candidate in this election who's actually got a track record. She's got a record of delivering. I worked with her when I was a minister in the FCDO, so I saw that at first hand. And I think also with Liz, we have someone who, she's the right person, in my view, to pull together the red wall and the blue wall. Okay. I mean, she has experience of living in the red wall. She understands the challenges that people are facing. But I think it's important to also recognise that, in this context, tax cutting is one important element of it. But experience of being a minister, experience of government, and actually a track record of delivering is going to be really important. So that in day one, we can get on there and
that's
deliver
what she's committed
continue.
to. Well, that's what she's committed to do. She says from day one. So how much will it all cost? Sajid Javid said yesterday on the Sunday morning show it would amount to £39 billion. So how much would Liz Truss's commitments cost?
Liz will be setting this out. This is a very early
she's going to do it from day one. She said she's going to do it from day one. So surely she's already totted up the figures
of this contest. I mean, the point here is that Liz is someone who has committed to tax cutting. I think absolutely rightly so in the context of the economy. Well, but somebody who actually will get on and deliver for
except that even Rishi Sunak, who has been Chancellor,
really
Wendy, I'm going to have to interrupt you a little bit because I know you want to obviously set out your stall on behalf of Liz Truss. But on this issue of tax cuts and the economy, bearing in mind that is the sort of centre ground where we're talking about issues here, if Liz Truss is committing to this tax-cutting agenda, and it's been described as fairy tales by the man who has had that job for the last few years, what's happening to fiscal discipline within the Conservative Party?
Look, what I'm not going to sit here and do is start and slate other candidates. I'm here to as you said, set out Liz's stall very clearly. But it's really important that we allow all the candidates to make their cases and that our colleagues can have their say in this election.
Well, except Rishi Sunak has described Liz Truss's policies as fairy tales when it comes to.
I'm not going to start getting into any sort of tit for tat or slagging off other candidates. What I want to see, what I think people want to see, what I know my constituents want to see is our party uniting around a candidate so that we can get on and face the challenges that face our country, tackle them and deliver for our country. Falling out amongst ourselves is not the way to go, and slating one another certainly isn't.
All right, well, we'll hold you to that, Wendy, of course, as this contest unfolds. When it comes to corporation tax, what would you and Liz Truss like the rate to be?
Look, I'm not going to speculate on what the rate should be, but what I would say is that this is about supporting our small businesses. This is about choosing a candidate to be the next Prime Minister of our country that understands the challenges of the country.
But what does it look like, Wendy? Because people will say at the moment it's 19%. It was going to increase up to 25%. Are we talking about cancelling that rise or cutting it from 19%?
Look, Liz will be setting out her stall, but Liz has been very clear. She is a candidate that is about cutting taxes because cutting taxes is about helping people helping constituents and fundamentally helping business.
Do you agree with Kwasi Kwarteng, your colleague, that we can't simply be accountants, he said, trying to balance the books the whole time? Doesn't that rather point to undermining what the Tory party has always said it is about, and that is fiscal discipline?
No, it's not about that at all. This is about making the right decisions for the country. This is about making the right decisions to help people. This is about making the right decisions that help people, that help businesses, that get through the difficult times. And as I set out at the start, you know, Liz has been very, very clear. She's a tax-cutting candidate. She's got a track record of delivery, and she brings a huge amount of experience to the job. You know, this is not the time, quite frankly, for a novice. We need somebody who has got experience.
All right.
And she has that.
No time for a novice, as you say. Do you think Liz Truss will be content for voters to regard her as continuing Boris Johnson's legacy? Rishi Sunak has clearly distanced himself in terms of approach. Would Liz Truss be happy to be the continuity Boris Johnson candidate?
I don't see Liz as a continuity candidate. What I do see in Liz, though, is someone who can unite the blue wall and the red wall together, unite our party together as well, but also be the right candidate for the next election. And so that, you know, I firmly believe that we have the best chance of winning the next election with Liz at the helm, and that's why I'm backing her.
And will she publish her tax return, since that seems to have become an issue? Sajid Javid said he would, and so did Nadeem Zahawi.
I think you should ask her that question.
Right, but do you think it would be good in terms of openness and transparency?
I think that now more than ever we need openness from all of our candidates, and we need to have a debate. I understand the absolute need to have a debate, and let's get on and have that debate and have an election, and then we as a party will choose the next Prime Minister, well, the next leader of the party who will be Prime Minister and lead the country forward and tackle those issues that we are facing, which I come back to my point is we need some with experience and a record of delivery.
Wendy Morton, thank you very much. Just a quick response from you, Laura, and then I'll come to you, Angela.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, Rishi Sunak is a low-tax Conservative. I didn't disagree with anything that Robert was saying in terms of the core principles, but I think sometimes it can be easy to make uncosted promises, and, you know, you were pushing Wendy quite hard there. In the second part of the piece you showed with Paul Johnson this morning, he went on to say, he was talking about inflation actually, he was saying with inflation running at 10%, if you make a sequence of tax cuts, you can exacerbate the inflationary pressures. Of course, Rishi Sunak is going to want to avoid doing that. And I just would say, finally, I sent an email to all the members of my association. There's just under 1,000 of them. And I said that the qualities I would be looking for in the candidate I backed, I hadn't decided at that time, would be a strong sense of fiscal discipline and sound financial management. And I've been reading the responses this morning and seeing how many of my constituents weren't looking for sort of, you know, big promises. They were really underscoring how much they wanted to see a candidate who would commit to sound financial management.
Are the others promising fairy tales?
Well, look, I haven't heard everything that they're saying. I know it's easy to sort of pick out a sequence of headlines where tax cuts have been said repeatedly, and I'm certainly not laying into any other candidate. But I think being really realistic about the challenges we face and allowing the next Prime Minister a sensible measure of discretion that's in line with Conservative values, which is exactly what Rishi Sunak is asking for, is absolutely right at this point.
Let's be clear.
Yeah.
The Conservative Party have voted for 15 tax rises, which has taken the tax levels in this country to the highest level that have been for a very long time. We've got zero growth as well. They've wasted a lot of that money in the COVID fraud, in the dodgy contracts to their mates. We've got a society that isn't working. We've got queues at the passport office, queues to get your driving licence. Nothing's working. There's huge backlogs in the courts. The police are scarcely doing their job. And in the last 3-4 days since Boris Johnson was dragged to that resignation speech, £330 billion of tax cuts have been announced if you add them up. In the 11...
But Keir Starmer has said he wants to reduce the tax burden. I mean, wouldn't this be an ideal opportunity? Let's hear them. Let's hear what they are.
Listen, this is a government that Laura has just talked about being fiscally responsible. It isn't fiscally responsible. It's completely fiscally incoherent. And now we've got a leadership campaign where people are talking about billions upon billions upon billions of pounds of tax cuts. They won't tell you how they're going to pay for it. Nobody's mentioning the cost of living crisis. Nobody's mentioning the fact that they're all in favour of increasing defence spending because of the problems with the war in Ukraine. They're saying nothing apart from they're going to be cuts in the health service to deal with the backlogs. It's incoherent. They're living on another planet.
You respond and then I'll get on to Labour.
Well, you're not even acknowledging the fact that there's a tax cut coming in this month in the shape of the national insurance tax cut, which for 70% of working households is a £330
to
tax
compensate
cut.
for the increase that Rishi introduced to pay for social care. And now we hear that Sajid Javid, who was the health secretary, is going to get rid of that completely. It's incoherent,
But very respectfully, you're sort of skating between subjects. You're talking about backlogs in court and in hospitals, which we know to have been a product of COVID. I mean, I'm very involved in justice, as you know.
Public sector help that?
Well, I don't think that's been said, but I think just to point to every malaise in society and say it's a result of Tory mismanagement, when you know as well as I do that they've managed an extraordinary public health crisis, and there's an inevitable consequence of that. You skirted onto the issue of Ukraine and the amount of money. I don't know how many of the British people disagree with the fact that we spent over £2 billion providing military aid with Ukraine.
With that, Laura,
Nobody's.
but the fact is,
the reality
that some of your
don't talk over
some of your leadership contestants are saying they want increases in defence spending, at the same time as they're saying they want to cut taxes. Now, that just doesn't add up. It's incoherent.
OK, well, perhaps I give you a qualified acceptance of that. That's not what Rishi Sunak's saying. But one of the things, in terms of being realistic, actually, and I have had a conversation with him about this, I think it is really important to keep reminding the British public that the war effort in Ukraine and the cost of supporting Ukraine has a direct ramifications on the economy here. Everything we've done imposing sanctions on Russia has led to an inflationary spike. And I think sometimes we don't have enough of an honest dialogue about the way that the global shocks have really put a huge amount of pressure on the British.
Well, let's go back to the issue of tax cuts. You say it is incoherent. We are starting a leadership contest in this country in terms of people setting out their stall. Isn't this an ideal moment for the leader of the Labour Party to set out very clearly exactly what path he would plot in terms of reducing the tax burden on individuals? Because that's what he's broadly said. How would you do it?
Well, you'll have to wait for our manifestos. The fact is that in the opposition, we will bring forward our manifesto in the appropriate time. We don't know when the next election's going to be. What Keir Starmer has pointed out is that there's now nearly £330 billion of tax cuts being promised by the Tory leadership hopefuls, when they've just spent the last few years voting 15 tax increases.
Right.
And Labour's position, even during the pandemic, Labour's position, I'm not going to do the accent, but Labour's position is basically to be that Harry Enfield.
What do you mean do the accent?
Is to be that Harry Enfield character saying, "Oh, I wouldn't have done it like that." You know, that's surely Labour needs to have some answers on how it would help individuals.
I mean,
we had the windfall profits tax,
and that's been taken up broadly by the government.
Took that up, so I'm not listening to lectures in an accent or not.
Well, but
from Robert about that.
Beyond that, is it sustainable for Keir Starmer and for you to go on the airwaves providing a critique? Of course, you're in opposition, without setting out a direction in terms of taxation, in terms of the national insurance contribution. Well, you haven't even said you would reverse, clearly, the increase in national insurance contributions, or, if you did reverse it, where that money or how you would raise that money to pay for the pandemic recovery and social care.
In due course, we will set those things out when we have a manifesto and an election.
Is that sustainable?
I generally buy the idea that the point of being in opposition is to oppose things, and that you, and therefore, how much time you set out, setting out your most detailed spending plan is usually a waste of time, especially when there's a Tory leadership
strategic error,
and especially when there's a Tory leadership contest taking up all the airways. But the problem that Keir Starmer's team have to kind of try and establish is that they do actually have a plan for these things. They do have the direction they want to set, and we are going to need to see some of those at party conferences.
All right, well, Keir Starmer has been giving a speech this morning. Let's just have a listen to some of it.
Britain deserves better than this. We need a fresh start. And I know you'd expect me to say this, but we're not going to get that from a Conservative Party infected with the chaos virus caught from Boris Johnson.
I mean, isn't that the problem, Laura, that everyone who served in that government, including Rishi Sunak, and perhaps most of all Rishi Sunak, is tainted by supporting Boris Johnson, a character that they say they knew right up until last week?
I think, look, Rishi Sunak was out of the blocks with Sajid Javid when he resigned, and it brought the whole house of cards down.
It was only a day or so, though, before everybody else. He stuck with Boris Johnson all the way through, right until almost the end.
Well, I think, you know, it was a few weeks since the publication of the Sugre report, and it was a very significant resignation. Within 48 hours, he'd gone as Prime Minister. So, I mean, it had a huge effect on the psychology, actually, of the Conservative Party. And can I just say, looking at Keir Starmer's the clip there, what was interesting is that the first bit of what he said is exactly what nearly every Tory leadership candidate, everybody's saying. And I think that the question that Labour haven't yet resolved at all is, you know, he's right, of course, to say we need a new start and we need to rebuild trust and we need a new start for the economy. All of that language is going to be said by every single Tory candidate. I think that probably the British public would agree with that, but I'm not sure I don't actually think that they agree with the second part of what he said, is that it can't be a Conservative that delivers it. I don't think they're persuaded by Keir Starmer and the Labour Party yet. And one of the reasons is exactly what you've just been saying, where you've been probing, Angela, is because they don't know what they stand for. And actually, I think the country is very much ready and receptive to hear a talented new Conservative leader come out and say that.
Can I just say, I mean, Rishi Sunak and the rest of them put Boris Johnson... it gave him the keys of number 10 Downing Street when they knew exactly what sort of a person he was, they knew exactly what his character flaws were, they knew exactly what his relationship with the truth and probity was. And they did it, and they are culpable in the chaos and the damage that has resulted, in the trashing of our international reputation, in the ripping up of all of the expected norms of behaviour in public life that he has inflicted on us in the last 3 years. They are culpable. They voted for it. That is why they cannot pretend we'll get rid of him, even though we put him there in the first place, and put up with all this outrage, and then we'll hope that nobody pretends that we've had our grubby little fingers all over it, and then we'll pretend that somehow we can have another Conservative government. This will be the 4th Conservative Prime Minister in 6 years. 3 of them will have been selected by the tiny Tory selectorate that is completely unrepresentative of any of the country at large. They think that they can switch their leaders when it suits them without a general election. It's time that when we do have a general election, I'd have one today. If we do have a general election, we need to sweep the whole lot of them out of government where they belong.
Well, we've had 4 different. We're all beyond to our 4th leader, but we've also, in that time, had 4 general elections, and a Conservative government's been returned every time. And I would just say, I actually don't agree with the line that Angela's taking, that a new leader precipitates a new general election, because I don't agree with the line that the Prime Minister had, which was that he had a personal mandate of 14 million voters. I think we live in a parliamentary democracy. It's the Conservative Party that won the last general election. I think it will win the next one too.
Robert and Jess, this idea, I suppose, to some extent, Keir Starmer, his unique selling point, and certainly once he was cleared, he and Angela Rayner, when it came to Beergate on Friday, is that he is a man of honesty and probity. Does that diminish somewhat without Boris Johnson still as Prime Minister, Robert?
Well, I think, I mean, listening to Angela, I was quite amused because obviously Keir is one of the few frontbenchers who stuck it out under Jeremy Corbyn, who he disagreed with absolutely everything on, and then reinvented himself as a leader, saying, oh, it's nothing to do with me. Even though I stood for leader on a Corbynite platform, I'm going to be completely different. So I don't think Labour really have much moral standing in that particular debate. But in terms of what you're saying, I mean, the problem is, as I said in my column this weekend, Starmer is kind of the human equivalent of tapioca. He's just very, very dull. And I'm sorry, it's not his fault. It's just how he comes across. And it's really hard, especially when the Tory party has an 80-seat majority and has so much drama within it. It's really hard for Labour to get heard.
But does that work to some extent? Robert obviously using the word tapioca, boring and dull, as you might describe it. But for some people, that's what people would like as a counter to Boris Johnson. But now Boris Johnson is going, will that have the same effect?
I think that what Labour have certainly been trying to to do over the past few months is that everything, you know, after about January was about, you know, trying to taint every single Conservative with Boris Johnson's behaviour, saying they're supporting him. I mean, that's why there were arguments a few weeks ago to have a no confidence vote, because otherwise, you know, then you can tar every Conservative and say they've actually voted to keep Boris Johnson in office. On the other hand, you'll see there's been a big push for some people in the party who realised earlier than others which way the wind was blowing, that Boris Johnson was going to be ousted by his party, that you then have to taint the whole party with, you know, this is after 12 years of Tory government. The reality is, I think that, you know, focus groups are showing them that people don't necessarily see Boris Johnson as a continuation of 12 years of Tory government. If anything, he feels a bit like a first term of a Prime Minister. And therefore, do you have people saying, in fact, we should give the Conservatives another chance? An extraordinary thing for people to be saying, perhaps, after 12 years. But that's the thing that Labour will be contending with.
Angela?
Well, it's clear that the Conservative Party have been in office in various iterations, once with the Liberal Democrats and now with Boris Johnson, Mr Immorality.
But do you think Keir Starmer is going to struggle more against a new candidate, a new leader of the Conservative Party, who will not be like Boris Johnson?
Well, I think that the struggle is against is a contest of ideas, and it's also a contest of the record of this Tory government, which is dire when you look at the numbers of people in poverty, soaring levels of child poverty, the immiseration of large areas of our country, people really struggling with the cost of living crisis, virtually stagnant growth, investment levels and productivity levels that are a joke.
Well, let's put some of these things...
I mean, that's what you have to do when you're contending with different values and different political ideas to change the direction of the country, and that is what Labour will do.
All right, under Keir Starmer. Let's talk to Robin Miller. He is backing Suella Braverman, the Attorney-General, in the contest. Let's have a look at this headline in the Daily Telegraph. A government I lead will move heaven and earth to get us back on track. The British people put their trust in this government. I will never betray that. We're talking about the contest of ideas, Robin. Let's start with one of the policies that Suella Braverman is campaigning on. She says she wants to suspend the all-consuming desire to achieve net zero by 2050. How long would she do that for?
Well, I think the problem to address first there is why. And there are very many noble goals set, very many ambitions pressed upon any leader, on any government by members of the public. And this is what people tell me in my own constituency of Aberconwy in North Wales. You know, how do we get to a greener economy? How do we get to net zero? But then comes the difficult job, the practical issue of how do you pay for it? How do you actually make that transition? So I think the question that Suella is asking there is the right one, and that is, it's a great goal. Let's keep that goal, but let's ask the detailed question, let's ask the practical question about how much it's going to cost us to get there. OK, so you want to keep the goal, but to when? If you look at other countries, pretty well all of Europe and North America is committed to that target by 2050, achieving net zero. Russia and China, 2060. India, 2070. Where would a Suella Braverman government put it? So again, this is one of those things that a leader will put down in detail as the campaign rolls on. But absolutely, that commitment to working towards net zero remains. But I think for anybody now to be able to say, nail in the ground on such and such a date, we're going to get there. That's a hostage to fortune, because nobody yet has really understood fully all of the costs attached to it. And but you'd have to undo the commitment that exists at the moment to achieve net zero by 2050. You'd have to undo that if you are going to suspend it in perpetuity or until such time that you decide when it's going to be achieved. Well, I look at it the other way and actually say we're doing a great job so far. I think that the role of the UK worldwide, and in terms of moving to a green energy basis, is strong. I think that track record is there. No one can question that commitment to moving towards it. We've just had a latest round of financing and bids for further investment in offshore and other forms of green energy. So I think that absolutely the direction of travel is set, and there's good progress being made towards it. Right, no, absolutely. But still, at this point in time, you would be abandoning for the moment that target, a target that the public broadly seem to support, and also many in your own party. I mean, you're going to be at odds with both those electorates. I don't agree. I think that what people see is a government that's making good progress. I think what they want is a government that will wrestle with the difficult questions. They know that government isn't a matter of sound bites and simple phrases. They know that there's aspiration in all sorts of ways and areas. And I think that's why they voted. To Laura's point, she just made a very good point, is that the last 4 governments have been Conservative governments because we have a record of delivery. People recognise you can't predict the future. I mean, for goodness sake, look at the last 2.5 years.
Well, let's ask Laura, would you back the idea of suspending the target to achieve net zero by 2050?
I don't think we can abrogate our responsibilities on this. I think that the net zero date of 2050 isn't arbitrary. It's an imperative if we're going to deal with the risk of flooding and droughts and migration flows and food security. So very respectfully, I do disagree with Robin on that.
Robin, why is Suella Braverman the right Brexiteer to be the next leader of the Conservative Party?
I actually reached the decision quite early and quite quickly, and I surprised myself in that. I thought it was going to be complicated. I thought there was lots of options. But I set myself a series of questions to do with integrity, to do with experience, to do with commitment to the manifesto, because, again, Laura made an excellent point. We don't run presidential elections here. We have parliamentary elections, and it's imperative for the Conservative Party to demonstrate that continuity. And I think that Suella has that rare blend of those qualities, plus also a determination. And I've seen that personally. I chair a group of about 80 backbenchers, Conservative backbenchers, who are really supporting the Union and strengthening the United Kingdom. And she has absolutely carried the flag in Cabinet on some of the tough discussions around, for example, the Northern Ireland Protocol.
All right, well, would it be a problem if the winning candidate, the next leader of the Conservative Party, voted Remain?
I think we are now a party which has passed that.
Right, but so it wouldn't be a problem if it was Jeremy Hunt, for example, or Liz Truss?
I think we're a party that's now past that, and the question is now, how do we make the best of Brexit? I think these are questions, these are issues perhaps which prey more in the mind of the press, may I suggest, than they do certainly on the doorsteps in Aberconwy. This is not an issue that comes up.
Well, it might do, though, amongst some of your colleagues in the Conservative Party. I'm just going to read to you and also to our viewers this tweet from Stephen Swinford in The Times. The battle for the Tory right is getting increasingly congested. Hearing that Jacob Rees-Mogg could throw his hat into the ring for the leadership, and if Priti Patel does as well, and there's talk about that later on today, there would be 4 candidates vying for the Tory right. Perhaps you'd like to support Jacob Rees-Mogg instead?
Well, I prefer to deal with facts for a start, not hypotheses. So Jacob hasn't yet, Priti hasn't yet, and I know, because I've had many of the phone calls and the conversations myself with colleagues, that there's a tremendous base of support for Suella. Critically, she has the experience of having been in Cabinet. That sets her above others. Not all others, but that sets her above many others. And I can't see a way that someone who hasn't been in Cabinet, certainly over the last 2.5 years, can hope to convey that authority and leadership within a cabinet as leader. OK,
Robin Miller, thank you very much for joining us, supporting Suella Braverman's campaign. Comment there, I mean, if Priti Patel does join the race and also Jacob Rees-Mogg, it will be very crowded, won't it, on the right?
It will, and I think there's a broader sort of congestion in terms of, I mean, on the issue of tax we've been talking about, it is sort of breaking down into a Rishi versus the others. As Laura said, it's not that Rishi doesn't want to cut taxes. In fact, I think on business taxes, he made it very clear while he was Chancellor that taxes on investment were his focus rather than headline rates of corporation tax. But I think there was genuinely, that is definitely the part of the competition where there were more voices if Jacob and Priti do get in. But Jacob would also be very much a continuity Boris voice. I mean, he's been absolutely one of the most loyal lieutenants of the...
Self-declared, I would say, in that, so he hasn't hidden it, has he, in any way? Jess, do you agree with Robin that we've all moved beyond the labels of Leave and Remain?
I think that depends on who you are. I've certainly spoken to Conservative MPs over the past week or so who've said to them it definitely matters to them that it is still a Brexiteer who is the leader of the party. For others, I think it matters. It clearly matters less. I mean, seeing someone like Esther McVeigh back Jeremy Hunt, or seeing some of the Red Wall MPs back Tom Tugendhat shows you that it's not necessarily the case. I think people like Liz Truss have embraced Brexit, even more fulsomely than some original Brexiteers.
Yes, so. The power of the convert, of course. Yeah. I think we might just have time to look at some of the campaign videos that have been put together. Let's just have a look.
In the coming days and weeks, I will set out my vision for how we can build a better future for our country. I've told you a bit about my story, but I'm running to be our next Prime Minister because it's your stories that matter most.
We face major challenges as a country, from the economy to security to the environment. And I love our country. I want the best for us all, and I'm the person to deliver that.
Our leadership has to change. It needs to become a little less about the leader and a lot more about the ship. I'm Penny Mordaunt, and I'm ready to serve as the next leader of the Conservative Party.
Hi everyone, it's Raymond here, the Member of Parliament for Gillingham and Rainham. Today, after careful consideration, I've decided to seek the nomination to be the leader of our party and to step up and to serve our great country as its next Prime Minister.
Well, a range of stars there for those campaign videos, especially there from Raymond Chishti at the end, going for something slightly different. You've run for the leadership before. How important are these things?
Well, they are a sort of shop window that you have to have, and it's a difficult thing to try and do something different and do something that attracts attention. I think Raymond Chishti is probably the one that's achieved that out of those three.
Do you have some sympathy with them all, having, as you say, to try and do something distinct that's going to grab people's interests?
Well, I suppose so. They are what they are. They're one of those things you've got to have. If you get it wrong or you make an error, like I think Penny Mordaunt did, not getting permission to use various people's faces, it can become a sort of story that you don't want it to become.
Yes, well, Penny Mordaunt did have to re-edit her video. Where is she, by the way? I mean, she's the one I haven't seen.
I think it's extraordinary, actually, because I think journalists were certainly being briefed very widely about Penny Mordaunt's operation, how many she already had signed up, how well organised it is. I'm sort of yet to see a great deal of evidence of that come out so far.
Robert, persuaded by any of those?
So, I mean, Rishi's was obviously the most polished, as you'd kind of expect.
Yes, he's had quite a lot of practice.
Raymond, let's gloss over that one. Yeah. The trust video I thought was really interesting because it absolutely stressed her establishment credentials, as we've heard earlier. There were lots and lots of shots of her as a world statesman meeting people. It feels like she's decided, because her brand is actually quite insurgent, but I think she's decided there's a crisis happening. I need to show that I'm a stateswoman. Penny again I was very flattered she used our think tank's logo in it to illustrate the importance of policy in the debate.
Did she ask you beforehand?
She did not ask us before. But also, there was an unfortunate coincidence. She did use the music from the Day to Day's video of Britain, what a great country we are, which quite a lot of people on Twitter spotted.
I'm sure they commented on it. I just want to show you this tweet from Greg Hands. The Conservative Party is the party for everyone in Britain. As recently as 2005, when I was first elected MP, we had just 17 women MPs and 2 ethnic minority MPs. Now look at our leadership race. Laura?
Yeah, and I think it's a leadership race to be proud of, actually, on that measure, because, you know, when you look at it, there is, historically, all of the candidates for the Conservative leadership would have been posh white men, and now there's 2. And that, you know, there's 9, 10 people who are either non-white or women, and I think it's just a really positive reflection of the diversity within the party and at the very top of it.
I mean, what do you think when you look at that and then look at your own party and think we've still yet to have the first female leader of the party and Prime Minister? You tried.
I mean, obviously it would be nice to have been successful, but I mean the thing is that our country is more diverse now. And having fought for equality all my life, I'm pleased that I'm now a member of the gayest parliament in the world, that we have the diversity we have. At the top of our politics, the shadow cabinet's 50% female. So I think that there's a lot of good movement in that regards across political.
Well, that brings us to the end of today's programme. Thank you to all of my guests today. I'll be back tomorrow, of course, with more Politics Live at 12:15. Please join me then. Bye.